Hello everyone and welcome back to the StudyTube Project channel. Today we are going to be talking about William Shakespeare. Dun dun dun! Except it's not going to be intimidating. We're going to look him in the eye and say, Willie, we're not afraid of you. Anyway, my name is Jack Edwards. Today we are going to be tackling the work of William Shakespeare and welcome to the channel. The work and lasting impact of William Shakespeare is absolutely everywhere. If you've ever said that you've been on a wild goose chase, then you're quoting Romeo and Juliet. The phrase "love is blind" is from The Merchant of Venice. To kill them with kindness or break the ice is quoting The Taming of the Shrew. And if you ever mention the green-eyed monster, that comes from Othello. In fact, even the response "fair play" can first be found in Shakespeare's The Tempest, and the first ever "your mum" joke actually originates from Titus Andronicus. Chiron says, "Thou hast undone our mother," to which Aaron replies, "Villain, I have done thy mother." So in today's video, I'm going to be sharing a basic introduction to William Shakespeare and his work, including the sonnets, and then I'm going to be giving some advice as to how you can actually understand the works of Shakespeare. So I'll put the timestamps on the screen now so you can skip to the bits if you want to, but for now, let's get started on a basic introduction to William Shakespeare. William Shakespeare was born in Stratford-upon-Avon in England in 1564 to Mary Arden and John Shakespeare. William later married Anne Hathaway and had his first baby with her when he was just 18. This was followed by a set of twins, so by the age of 21, he was father to 3 children. Eventually, he decided to pursue a career in London, and so he moved there to join Lord Chamberlain's Men, which was a theatre company, and his plays proved incredibly popular. Now, the plays that William Shakespeare wrote can be separated out into 3 categories. We have the history plays, which are realistic stories of historical figures. We have the tragedies, which usually end in a lot of deaths, especially that of the tragic hero. And then finally we have the comedies, which end in marriages or reunions. Now, he wrote these plays under 2 different monarchs, which does actually impact the way that he writes. The history plays, for instance, were written in Elizabethan times and feature a lot of Tudor propaganda, for example by depicting Richard III as evil. And a lot of the comedies were also written under Elizabeth I. Later, King James I came to the throne, and a lot of Shakespeare's mature tragedies were written in Jacobean times, for example Othello, King Lear, and Macbeth. Throughout his career, he also wrote a lot of amazing poetry, for example Venus and Adonis, which includes so many sexual innuendos. For example, "Graze on my lips, and if those hills be dry, stray lower, where the pleasant fountains lie." And he also wrote a lot of sonnets, which are 14-line poems. They're written in iambic pentameter, which we'll come on to a little bit later on, and they also have a volta, which basically is the Italian word for turn and means a change in the mood, the tone, the plot of the poem. Now, there are actually 2 different forms of sonnets, and Shakespeare was the pioneer for one of them. So one is the Petrarchan sonnet, which has an octave sestet structure, so 8 lines with a rhyme scheme followed by 6 lines with a different rhyme scheme, and a volta on the 9th line. This follows a rhyming structure of ABBA, ABBA, CD, CD, CD. But then we have the Shakespearean sonnet, which is different. So a Shakespearean sonnet is 3 quatrains and then a couplet. So the rhyme scheme is AB, AB, CD, CD, EF, EF, GG, and the volta is on the couplet. These are the main themes to look out for in Shakespeare's sonnets. Firstly, we have the passage of time. "Yet do thy worst, old time, despite thy wrong. My love shall in my verse ever live young." Procreation. "Thou shouldst print more, not let that copy die." Desire. "From fairest creatures we desire increase." Sexuality. "No want of conscience hold is that I call her love, for whose dear love I rise and fall." There's also the figure of the dark lady. "Then will I swear beauty herself is black, and all they foul that thy complexion lack." Now, these poems are written in iambic pentameter. So to break that down, basically an iamb is an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. And then the word pentameter tells us that each line has 5 sets of these sets of 2 syllables, the iambs. So in total, there are 10 syllables per line. And it makes this sound: dee-dum, 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 dee-dum. So there you can see that the second syllable is always the one that's stressed. For example, "If music be the food of love, play on." Now, the plays also include a lot of iambic pentameter, but they aren't necessarily meant to be read in that really repetitive structure. So take this extract from Richard III, for example. You wouldn't read it like this: "Now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by this son of York, and all the clouds that lured upon our house you wouldn't read or perform it like that. It's just the way that it's written. So usually in the plays, people of high birth or high status or high worth speak in iambic pentameter. And this is especially found in soliloquies. So soliloquies are basically when the character shares their innermost thoughts to the audience when no one else on the stage can hear them. On the contrary, we have the more colloquial talk of people of lower status or lower class, and they speak in prose. Or at least that's the way that Shakespeare wrote the plays, so that you could tell who was of a higher status and a higher class. So that's a bit of an introduction, and now I'm going to be talking about how to read Shakespeare, and for this I'm going to be focusing on the plays. So first and foremost, it is important to note that the plays were meant to be performed, not read. In fact, even the actors who were Shakespeare's contemporaries weren't often given the whole script to read, they were just given their lines. So that means that the best way to understand these plays is by reading them aloud to yourself or by watching adaptations and performances of them. Hearing actors perform these lines will give you a better insight into the tone that the line is meant to be read in. Also, the way that these actors will deliver their lines makes it much more clear A, who's speaking, and B, when there are jokes or witticisms. I'll put a list of places on the screen now where you can watch performances and see some more adaptations. Another bonus of modern adaptations and performances, for example by the RSC, is that they often challenge the traditional impressions that we get from plays. For example, the most modern version of Othello that the RSC performed cast a character who is typically assumed to be racist as a black actor, which was awesome and so interesting because it really flips everything on its head. Also, some of the most modern adaptations include rap battles and dance-offs, and it's just chaotic and a wild time, and I would thoroughly recommend. Now, the next thing I know puts a lot of people off is the language of Shakespeare. However, organisations like No Fear Shakespeare provide what is essentially a modern translation of Shakespeare's writing right next to the original script. And this helps you to understand exactly what each line is trying to tell you, so you can really focus on the language that Shakespeare uses. Alternatively, something that I personally like to do is to read a synopsis of what's happening on each page before I read it. The Oxford and Arden editions of Shakespeare plays are especially good for this, and they'll usually have a really basic synopsis of what's about to happen on the page you're about to read, so you're still reading it in a way where the plot is slowly fed to you, like you're not getting the whole thing in one go and ruining it completely, but you really focus on the language and how that plot unfolds rather than what is actually going on. These editions often also include definitions of certain complicated words or obsolete words that we don't really use anymore, as well as allusions to mythology and folklore. Now, when I did a module at university studying Shakespeare, one thing that my professors would always say to us is that your first reading of a Shakespeare play is always just receiving the plot, and it's only really upon rereading that you can truly appreciate and acknowledge and understand the artistry that goes into crafting each line. It's really incredible. And it's also important to read slowly. Slow and steady wins the race. It's a marathon, not a sprint. Granted, most Shakespeare plays actually aren't that long. It won't take you anywhere near as long as it would take you to read a novel. But if you only are consuming the plot, then you're getting about 20% of the artistry that Shakespeare puts into those plays. Another thing to appreciate, which I slightly touched on earlier, is the fact that there are loads and loads of allusions to Roman and Greek mythology, folklore, and history. For example, the War of the Roses. An example of how allusions to mythology sort of embellish the plays that they are included in could be when Iago is talking to Othello and he's deceiving him. He is being very two-faced. And there's this subtle irony in the fact that Iago swears by Janus. Now, Janus is the two-faced god. And so you can kind of see there how Shakespeare is alluding to his deception and the misinterpretation of events. Now, if it is the plot that you're struggling with, you could try watching some modern adaptations and interpretations of Shakespeare through modern films. For instance, The Lion King is actually based on Hamlet. She's the Man is based on Twelfth Night, West Side Story by Romeo and Juliet, and 10 Things I Hate About You is based on The Taming of the Shrew. Alternatively, if you're totally new to Shakespeare and don't know where to start, then Othello has the least characters, so maybe that's a way of understanding it. I would also say that Macbeth is probably one of the most straightforward plots, and research shows that A Midsummer Night's Dream is the most performed and therefore most popular Shakespeare play, so that could also be a good starting point. Although it is one of the comedies, and the comedies are usually quite deliberately convoluted and bizarre, and they have a lot of kind of witticisms and jokes, which aren't always that obvious on the first reading, especially if you're not used to reading Shakespeare. So that's just something to look out for. And also, don't get me wrong, I did not pick up on loads and loads of the puns or the witticisms or any of the, you know, imagery on first read. It really takes time to keep reading, keep working on it, and improving. Reading Shakespeare is actually something you can improve at. Similarly, if you are just starting out, then the sonnets could actually be a really great place to start because they're quite enclosed 14-line, tightly written poems. So that could be a good starting point for getting used to iambic pentameter, Shakespeare's style, the way that he uses imagery, and then think about the philosophical implications of what he is suggesting. So I am going to leave you with that and conclude this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope this helps to unlock the incredible world of Shakespeare's writing, because it truly is incredible. It can be intimidating, it can be difficult to read, 100% it can be difficult to read. In fact, it is difficult to read, but it's so rewarding once you start to really appreciate the artistry and the crafting that goes behind it. So thank you very much for watching. I've been Jack Edwards. Make sure you subscribe to my channel and also the StudyTube Project channel, where we have brand new videos going up every single day at 6 PM. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.